Welcome to Test Room, your go-to hub for professional knowledge sharing.
This video series is dedicated to mastering the API testing with Robot Framework. Are you new to APIs? Don't worry. This session will cover the fundamentals of API, giving you everything you need to get started with. In this session, we will cover what are APIs, commonly used web APIs, introduction to REST, HTTP methods used in REST, REST request and response structure, HTTP status code, overview of authentication, and robot framework request library installation, which is a key to automate API testing. API stands for Application Programming Interface. As the name indicates, it helps the two software systems or an application to communicate with each other programmatically. So you might be wondering, the systems are designed with the different technologies. Some are designed with Java, some are designed with C Sharp, or some will be using a backend technologies. And also they are designed to perform various tasks, right? So how do they communicate with each other? This is where the API come into picture. API acts as a bridge by defining a set of rules that enables the system to understand and interact with each other. Think of API as a translator that helps the two people who speak a different language to communicate seamlessly. Let us consider these two people who are talking in two different languages as the two software systems or the two software application, and they want to communicate with each other. Here the translator, that is an API, comes into picture and helps them to communicate with each other. API defines a set of rules, guidelines, or a protocol using which the two systems or two applications can interact with each other seamlessly. Let us try to understand how the API works. For an API to function, there must be two systems involved. They are called as a client or a service consumer or a server or a service provider. Okay, the client is an application that is basically in need of the data or a service. The service provider or a server is an application that processes the request and provides the requested data to the client. The client or a service consumer, whenever it is in need of a service or a data, it sends a request to the server or a service provider via the API. Typically, it is in the form of an HTTP request. Okay, the server basically has a logic to process the request from the client. It processes the request from the client and sends the data, requested data, back to the client in the form of a JSON or an XML or an HTML format. This is called as a response. Let us try to understand the client and server communication with an real world example. Let us consider an example of booking a flight. I have already opened a flight booking website wherein I need to give my starting point and the destination point where I want to travel. Let us give it as London, and preferred date of travel and number of people who are traveling. This flight booking application does not store any of the flight details. Instead, when you basically click a search button, the application sends a request to various airlines using API calls. The various airlines basically they have their flight data stored somewhere in a database or somewhere in the servers. If you see here, the flight booking application has retrieved the data from the various the airline databases and presented in a best possible way. Okay, based on the parameters that we have provided, like starting point, the destination point, the date of journey, and number of passengers who are traveling. What I meant to say here is the booking application itself will not store these flight data in their database. Rather than they get a real-time data from the various flight databases, right? So there may be chances that some flight maybe get delayed, or there may be a change in the schedule of some flight due to various reasons. So storing the flight data in the internal database is not a good idea. Rather than this booking application makes a call to the flight database of various flights to retrieve the data and represent to the user in a readable format. Okay, So here the booking application acts as a client, and the flight the server where the flight data is stored is acts as a server. So they communicate with each other with the help of an API. There are various types of APIs, but most commonly used are web APIs, which operate over the web. The two major types of web APIs are SOAP and REST. SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. The protocol uses XML for exchanging the data between the client and a server. SOAP is also known for its strict security policies and formal structure, making it ideal for enterprise-like applications. Whereas REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It is a simple, lightweight approach that operates over HTTP and HTTPS. It supports various data exchange formats that includes JSON, text, and HTML. It is widely used due to its less complexity and easy of integration with modern web services. While SOAP is robust and highly secure, REST is favored for its simplicity and efficient in most web applications. In this series, we will primarily focus on REST APIs as they are widely used for web services. Due to their simplicity and flexibility, our API testing with Robot Framework will also center around REST APIs, exploring how to test and validate them effectively. Now let us try to understand what is REST. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It is an architectural style for designing the web APIs. It is built upon 6 architectural constraints, and I won't go in details about these constraints here. I have already created a separate video that explains them thoroughly. An API is said to be RESTful when it is designed using these 6 architectural constraints. In a RESTful API, the client and server communicates over the web using an HTTP protocol. This means that both the client and server must adhere to the structure that is defined while exchanging messages. We will deep dive into the specific message structure later in this video. REST predominantly uses JSON as a format to exchange the data between client and server, but it also supports other data exchange formats like text, HTML, and XML. Just to let you know, in case of REST, every object is considered as a resource. Each resource is uniquely identified by an uniform resource locator. In this diagram, for example, in this diagram, the weather data service, flight information service, geographical location service are all of them are resources. Each of them are accessible by its own respective URI. RequestResponse.in is a platform that provides a free APIs for testing. It acts as an user management system, offering API to perform various operations on the user, such as adding the new user, updating the existing users, and retrieving the details of a specific user. And if I scroll down, you can see here this particular platform exposes a lot of APIs for testing, basically for managing the users. In this context, both the list of users and the individual users, here the list of users as well as the individual users are considered as a resource. Each of the users are considered as a resource. Each resource is accessible through an unique identifier. Here we have an API that lists the users who are part of the user management system. Okay, so the URL for this is /API users. Then you have a question mark. Question mark is called as in query parameters with a key and value pair. The key is a page and value is 2. In order to access the list of user, we need to use this particular path along with the base URL. Here the base URL is requestresponse.in. If I use this path along with the base URL, I will get a list of users who are part of the page 2. Okay, who are part of the page 2. Okay, basically this the response that matches with the response whatever is provided here. Okay, so what I meant here is each each item or an each object in case of REST is considered as an resource. For example, here the list of users are the one object, right? List of user is one object which is a resource, and the single user is also a resource. Okay, so everything in REST is a resource. Everything in REST is a resource which can be accessible using an unique identifier. Okay, unique identifier or an URI. So for accessing the list of users, the URI is the base URL slash the path that defines the path for identifying the list of users. Hope you understood this. Now let us try to understand what are HTTP methods. HTTP methods are basically the list of operations that we can perform using an API. In our earlier exercise where we saw the request and response.in, which is a platform that provides a free APIs for testing the user management, right? So here we can perform lot of operations with the user management system, like we can create a new user, you can delete a user, you can update the record of already created user, or you can get the details of a particular user. So you will be able to perform lot of operations using these APIs. These are called as the HTTP methods. We basically have get, post, put, patch, delete, head and options method which are supported by HTTP. So we will try to understand each one of them in detail. Get is all about retrieving a data pertaining to a particular resource. The request does not contain any body or an additional data. Since it is only to do with the retrieving the information for a given resource, it does not contain any body or any additional data. But whereas the response includes all the requested information. If you see this example, I am trying to get an information about an user whose ID is 2. Okay, in response to this request, the server is giving me the complete data which basically contains the body, like the complete information about the user such as first name, last name, his email, etc, etc, and also it will give a header as well as the body, okay, in response to this particular request. But while sending a request, I am not sending any additional data because I am only trying to retrieve the information for a given resource. The post method is used to create a new resource. Since we need to add a new entry, the request must carry the data that is required to create a new resource. In case of a user management system, this could be the user details like the first name, the last names, email, etc. Here I am trying to perform an post entry. That means I am trying to create a new user. So what I have done, I have clicked the post entry. So the endpoint URL for this is /API/user. This will create a user record. But in order to create a user record, we need to pass the certain data as part of the request, which is such as the name, the job. Here it takes the 2 parameter, name and the job. So in order to create a record, we are using a post method. But while using a post method, you need to provide the data that is needed to create a new resource. In case of the user management, here it takes the 2 parameters, name and job, which we will be passing as a JSON format. Put method is used to update an existing resource. If the resource does not exist, it creates a new resource. Like a post, the request carries the data that needs to be updated or created. Let us go to our test API and try to see the put method. Put method, as the name indicate, it is going to update a particular record. If I go to the post method, when we are trying to create an user, we gave the job description as a leader. But in case of the put, I am updating the job description from the leader to the resident. But one thing you should keep it in mind, while using the put and the post, the resource body should contain the complete resource representation. So if you see here, we are only changing the job, right? We are only changing the job description. but the resource body is also contains a name, which is the complete resource representation. This is how the server needs the body to be, right? To so rather than passing a JSON with the body that contains only a job, we are also passing the name as well, right? So for the post and for the put, the body, the request body should contain the complete resource representation. Okay, that is a key point you need to remember. The patch method is used to update the resource partially. For example, if you want to update only the email ID, you can use the patch method to update the email ID of a given user. In this case, unlike the post and put, you need not have to send as a complete resource representation as part of the as part of the as part of the resource body. In case in the in the previous example, right, in the previous example where we were using the put method just to change the job description, right? So if you use the patch instead of put to update the job description, the resource body from the resource body you can omit the name. You can only send the parameter that you need to change. Okay, for the patch method, unlike the post and put, you need not have to send the complete the element representation, complete resource element representation. Rather than you can only pass the parameter that you want to change. Okay, hope you understood this concept. Delete method is used for deleting a particular resource from the server. In case if you want to delete a user with an ID 1 from the user management system, then you will have to pass it as delete/users/1. Head is a method which is similar to the get, but here the server passes only the header parameters. It is not it will not respond back with the body. It will respond back with the header information. Okay, as the name indicates, head, it is to retrieve the header information. The purpose is to retrieve the header of a resource without a body. For example, if you give head as /users/1, it will be giving you the header information for the user with an ID 1. Option is used to determine the operation that you can perform for a given API, such as the allowed HTTP method. So for example, if you have an API, then you want to see what are the operations that you can perform using that API, then you can use options method. So you can use the options as options/user. It returns the type of the method, the operation that you can perform with the resource user, like get, post, etc. etc. Just a recap before we deep dive into the request and response message structure. In case of REST API, the client and server communicates over a web using HTTPS or an secured HTTP, which is called as an HTTPS protocol. This HTTP/HTTPS basically defines the structure, how the request and the response should look like. Okay, let us try to understand the structure of the request and response. In case of REST, everything is a resource. Each resource is identified by an URL or an URI, which is called as Uniform Resource Identifier or an Uniform Resource Locator. The request message always starts with an address, which is also called as an URI, which is an address of a particular resource. How to locate a particular resource in a server is coming from the URL. So request method is always starts with the address for a given resource that you want to access. Second one is about the method or an operation that you want to perform with that resource. If you want to retrieve a data, then you can use a get. If you want to create a new resource, then you can use post. If you want to delete a resource, you can use the delete method. The header provides an additional information about the request. These are called as an metadata. This is basically needed by the server in order to interpret the request body. Okay. Some of the commonly used headers are content type, which basically tells about the data exchange format. If you are using a JSON, then you can pass it as application slash JSON. If you are using an XML, then you can pass it as application.xml. Okay. Second one is an authorization. Certain cases the server needs to identify the user based on your identity, then only it provides an access to a particular resource. In such cases, you need to provide an authorization in terms of basic instance of username and password, or a token, or an API key. Basically, when there is a particular service is a paid service, then you need to provide an authorization, so that the server will identify whether the request is coming from the paid user or not, and accordingly it will provide you an access to the requested resource. Okay. The important part in case of the request is a body. The body contains the data that is you need to send a server. When we were discussing about a method, I also mentioned about a body. For a get request, typically you don't provide any body. For the post request, put request, and the patch request, you pass a body that carries an information which is needed for the server to create a new resource or an update a new resource partially or fully. Okay. And the body can contain the data in various format, like as JSON. If you are using a JSON, then you will have to pass header as a application.json. If it is an XML, then you have to pass it as an XML or an form encoded data. The get request, the body is usually empty, as the necessary data is often passed as a query parameter in the URL. Okay, for a get, it is only you are retrieving it, so you need not have to pass a body. This is how the typical the request message structure looks like. It always starts with an address. It contains a method, the operation, the metadata, that is an header, and the body, the actual information that is needed by the server to process your request. Okay. Hope you understood this. In case of a response, the message structure starts with the status code. The status code basically tells you about the status of the request. Okay. If your request is processed properly, then you will get a 200 series. Okay. For a get operation, always you get 200. Okay. For the post request, you get as 201. That means your resource is created properly. Along with that, there is also a message that tells okay or not. For example, if it is 200, it always give okay. If it is 201, it says created, and there is a series of codes which starts with the 400, like 404 not found. It is basically typically an client error. Okay. And also you will get sometimes 500, which is basically to do with the server internal error, 503 and things like that. All the 500 related error are related to the server. 404 series of error are related to are the client. There is some problem in your request. Okay. The client related errors are the 400 related errors, and success are starts with the 200. Okay, it is a 200 series of errors. Okay, that is a status code. Along with that, it also gives an header information, that is a metadata that is needed by the client in order to interpret the response. Typical are content type, the content length. Content type is JSON or an XML. Content type, how many bytes of data that the body contains. Okay, the response body contains. And the body is the body of the response contain the data structured by the server. Okay, basically it is what is requested. In case of a get, if you are requesting an information about a particular user, then the server gives you a data like his first name, his last name, his email ID, his address, and things like that. That will be a part of your body. The body can be in as a part of an JSON, it can be in HTML, it can be an image, it can be in plain text. The body is optional, maybe in empty in responses like 204. Sometimes you don't have any content, or 304 not modified. For certain operations, the body of your response can be empty. This is typically how your response structure looks like, which has an status and a code along with that. status is 200, along with that you get a message as an OK. Status is 404, it says a message as not found. Status is 500, it gives a message as internal server error. Then header, that is the metadata needed by the client to interpret the response body, and the body is actual content that is needed by the request. Hope you understood this. Now let us try to understand what is authentication. In some cases, the server needs to know about your identity before it provides an access to a particular resource. Okay, if a particular service that is offered by the service provider is a paid service, then you need to take a subscription for that, right? In such cases, when you make a call, you need to pass the key that is provided to you from the service provider. So if you pass this key, then the service provider will check whether you are a valid user or not, and then it will allow you to access the particular resource. There are different types of authentication methods that are supported in case of REST. I have listed only few of them which are commonly used. One is called as a basic authentication, wherein you will be passing as part of your header in the request, you will be passing the username and password, right? So your username and password will be encrypted in base64 format, like the username colon as password, and sent as part of the request header to the server. Server basically process this and sees your identity. If you are a valid user, then it will allow to perform further operation on a given resource. The bearer token, it is another kind of an authentication method, a token based authentication where the client sends the token in the authorization header. Okay, basically you will be getting an access token to access a particular service from the service provider, and then you will be passing that token as part of the header. Okay, the method during the header, you have to use a keyword called as bearer, the space, then the token that is provided to you from the service provider. Okay, in case of basic authentication, you need to pass the key as a basic, then followed by your 64 encoded format of your username and the password. Third authentication method is an OAuth2, an open standard for access delegation that allows the user to grant a third party application. So here in case of the OAuth2, there will be a separate server that basically used to check your identity. The client will be provided with the client ID and client secret, using which you can make a request to the third party server. Then the third party server checks your authentication, you are a valid user or not. If you are a valid user, it gives you a token back. Using that token, you can basically communicate with the service provider, okay, to access a particular resource. API key is a unique identifier key that is provided to the client to authenticate a request. Okay, the key is usually sent as a query parameter as part. This is not passed as part of your header, rather than it will be passed as part of your URL itself as a query parameter. At the end, you will have to use question mark, then API key equal to the value that is provided to you as a part of an API key. These are some of the authentication methods that are supported in REST. This covers the basic understanding about the APIs, like what are APIs, what are clients, what are servers, then how the client and server communicates with each other, what is REST, what is an HTTP and HTTPS protocol, what are the different methods, how the request and response structure looks like, and what are authentication methods that are supported. These basic concepts on API will serve as the foundation for you to start the API testing. Now let us move on to the crucial step of installing Robot Framework Request Library, which is essential for performing API testing. Let us go and search for the Python package for the request library. Yeah, this is this is an URL where you can find the robot framework request library. But one thing you need to understand here is robot framework library is aimed to provide HTTP API testing functionalities by wrapping the well-known Python request library. So in order to work with the robot framework request library, which is used for API testing, you need to basically install the Python request library because it is built on the Python request library. So the first precondition is that we have to go and install the Python library, and the instruction for which is pip install request. Okay, we will take only this. This will install the base Python library that is needed for the API testing. Let's go to the command prompt and let us copy paste this. First install the basic Python request library. It is completed now, and after that we go and install the robot framework request library, which is the wrapper around the request library and provides the keyword to work with the APIs. Now your installation is completed. Now we can go and try to import this library from our PyCharm. In the PyCharm, we already created vehicle insurance application as part of Selenium understanding. Now what we will do, we will try to add one more test case under test scripts folder as sample API testing dot robot. Then we will add the settings section where you can import the library, and this is a keyword that we need to use in order to work with the request library. Okay, so if you want to perform any API testing, then you will have to import the request library, which is basically coming from installing the robot framework request package. We will see the request library, and request library exposes lot of keyword to perform the API testing. Let us add the test case section and try to see what are all the keywords that it exposes. So let us add a test case as a sample API, under which you can add request library. If you put a dot, you see here it provides lot of keywords needed for the API testing, like delete for deleting a resource, get for retrieving a data, put head for retrieving the header information, then we have patch, then we have post, then we have put. These are all the operations that we can perform using an API. These are needed for the API testing. That brings us to the end of this video session. In this tutorial, we covered what are APIs, introduction to REST, HTTP methods in REST, REST request and response structure, HTTP status code, authentication, and installing the robot framework request library for API testing. I hope you enjoyed learning with me. If you found this video helpful, please consider supporting my channel by subscribing. Thank you.